join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
On the Camilla Tominey Show this Sunday morning from 9:30.
But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether.
6 months after delivering his own mini-budget, Liz Truss's Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will be giving me his reaction to this week's budget. You won't want to miss it. All that and more with me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday morning from 9:30.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. A grey, damp and breezy day today for many of us, but it is much milder for the vast majority compared with recent days. We've got a number of weather fronts moving through. We've already seen a warm front move through. That's brought the milder air from the southwest with it. Tightly packed isobars, gusty winds and a cold front pushing in from the afternoon with some spells of rain on it, initially affecting northern and western England, parts of Wales, as well as much as Scotland. A damp afternoon to come here with gusty winds as well. Some brighter skies ahead of that front for East Anglia and the southeast, and brighter skies as it clears Northern Ireland, although as temperatures rise to 15 or even 16 Celsius here, we could see some sharp showers or even a few rumbles of thunder into the afternoon and evening. And those showers will spread into central and southern Scotland during the evening as well, so some hefty downpours. But across central and southern parts of England, we've got spells of rain as the cold front slows down. The rain easing for a time during the early hours, but a lot of cloud about, and with the cloud and that air coming from the south and southwest, it is going to be a mild night away from the far north. Low single figures for Shetland, but otherwise for the vast majority mid to high single figures. Rainfall returns across southern and southeast England as we begin Friday, an area of rain clearing slowly through the morning. Elsewhere, a lot of showers occurring, some heavy downpours with hail possible across central and southern parts of England, but in between, some sunny spells and it's another warm afternoon with temperatures reaching 16, possibly even 17 Celsius in some central and northeastern parts. The showers continue for a time on Friday evening, and actually there'll be some longer spells of rain across parts of western Scotland into northern Scotland later as well. But it's another mild night, and so on Saturday we start off with that mild air. A lot of cloud again on Saturday with spells of rain, especially in the north. Drier on Sunday.
The
Good afternoon and welcome to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, we have got a jam-packed show for you today. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has arrived in Rwanda. She wants to reaffirm her commitment to the deportation policy. Legal challenges are very much still ongoing, but she's insisting the plan will still go ahead. We'll be debating whether that policy is still workable later in the show. Then Boris Johnson is fighting for his political future, but does he deserve one? He may have been reselected as the Conservative candidate for his constituency earlier this week, but next week he will face a 4-hour grilling by the Privileges Committee. That's over Partygate. Whether he misled Parliament, do you think he deserves a political future? Or do you think, like some of his allies have said, that this is a bit of a witch hunt? We'll be debating that. And since the budget, there has been a huge response to the government's childcare policy, giving 30 free hours of childcare to new mums, to families. Do you think that's the right way to go? Or should we actually be encouraging young mothers, women, to stay at home for longer? That will be a spicy debate later in the show, I'm sure. But for now, let's get the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it's 2:05. I'm Aaron Armstrong with the latest headlines. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has defended a plan to sell illegal migrants to Rwanda after the government confirmed 200 people crossed the channel yesterday, following 5 days of inactivity. Suella Braverman's in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, where she's been given a tour of a housing site which will provide long-term accommodation for refugees. Now, she maintains the government's deportation policy, which has faced some criticism, will act as a powerful deterrent for those considering dangerous journeys in small boats. The Home Secretary also visited a training and education centre where she addressed some of the graduates.
We are absolutely delighted and excited about our partnership with Rwanda to be creating a vibrant community here, to be a positive, secure, beautiful haven and home for many thousands of people. And I'm really excited about the contribution that these talented graduates will be making to the prosperity of Rwanda and the security of many, many people.
Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday, and writing on his Truth Social site, he told his supporters to protest and take the nation back. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is likely to bring charges against the former US president over an alleged hush money payment made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. That was in the run-up to the 2016 election. Now, the twice impeached former president has criticised the Attorney's Office for being corrupt and political. Rail passengers will be facing even further misery if new money's not found for union negotiations. That's the warning from the RMT, as thousands of its members at 14 train operators have walked out. The pictures you're seeing is, of course, of the SNP's chief executive, who has resigned with immediate effect. It follows reports that Peter Murrell, who's also Nicola Sturgeon's husband, is facing the threat of a vote of no confidence following a row over the party's membership numbers. In a statement, he said while there was no intent to mislead, he expects that has been the outcome. Well, let's update you with the rail strike story, because Mick Lynch from the RMT is warning passengers they face further misery on the railways unless new money's found for those union negotiations. That's the warning anyway, as thousands of the RMT members at 14 train operators have walked out. That's for the second time in the space of 3 days. It's led to widespread disruption, with fewer than 50% of train services across the country expected to run. Mick Lynch says transport ministers need to follow the example set by their colleagues in the Department of Health.
We need a change. We need the government to make a change in attitude. There's a bit of that this week we've seen in the health service and maybe in the teachers' unions. The difference in those deals is that there are no conditions. It's new money, but our members are having to swallow, or expected to swallow, vast changes to their working conditions, and they're not prepared to do that in order to get a very modest, poor pay rise.
Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has appeared in court on charges of corruption. Police stormed his residence in Lahore earlier this morning and arrested several of his supporters. It follows days of standoffs outside his property, with police attempting to arrest him on Tuesday. He is accused of unlawfully selling state gifts given to him by foreign dignitaries while in office. And the RAC says diesel drivers are not enjoying the savings from the freezing of the fuel duty, despite retailers making more money. It says major fuel retailers are not reducing prices, despite fuel rates they pay falling to a 15-month low. The company also found retailers are taking an average profit margin of nearly 19 pence for every litre they sell, and that is compared with 9 pence last year. And Gary Lineker says the support he's received from his colleagues at the BBC is gratifying and quite beautiful. The Match of the Day presenter was taken off air last week after comparing the language used to launch the government's new illegal migrant policy with that of 1930s Germany. But he will be back later to cover the FA Cup quarter-final between Manchester City and Burnley. And that is it for the moment. We'll be back with another news bulletin in about half an hour's time.
Yes, welcome to Real Britain. Here's what's coming up on the show this hour. Is Rishi Sunak proving his doubters wrong? The Prime Minister has made progress on a deal with Northern Ireland. Inflation is coming down. He's agreed a deal with France on immigration. It even looks like the pay dispute with the NHS could be coming to a resolution. But there is further strike action scheduled. Who's winning, Rishi or the unions? We'll be debating that. Then, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, arrived in Rwanda earlier today. She insists she's committed to the deportation policy, but with legal challenges ongoing. Is the policy actually workable? Let me know what you think. Later, the Prime Minister is expected to give Tory MPs a free vote on Boris Johnson's future in politics. That's if a committee finds he misled Parliament about those Downing Street parties during the pandemic. His political future is at stake, but does he deserve one? And the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. The court alleges the Russian president is responsible for war crimes, including the unlawful deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. But what impact will this actually have? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on today's topics. Please do tweet me at GBNews or at Carver Emily. You can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also watch us online on YouTube. Stay tuned. So strikes. The head of the RMT union, Mick Lynch, has said transport ministers should follow the example of the Department of Health as train passengers face disruptions today due to strikes. NHS staff in England have been offered a 5% pay rise from April. That's in a bid to end future industrial action. A month-long strike from the Passport Office may also put tens of thousands of summer holidays at risk. It's a mixed picture, certainly, but with the government seemingly close to resolving the pay dispute with the NHS. Is this a win for the unions or for the government? Joining me now is Executive Editor of The Critic magazine, Sebastian Milbank, and former editor of The Sun and Daily Disclosure, founder Kelvin Mackenzie. Thank you very much indeed. Kelvin, now perhaps I've got rose-tinted glasses, but it seems to me that Rishi Sunak is getting things done. Could be the latest step down from the health unions actually show that Rishi's got this right?
Well, it's a handsome deal, I must be honest with you, and therefore I'm not surprised they accepted it. I think on your news item there was the crunch point, which is coming with the two sets of public sector workers, junior doctors, who say they want God knows what to fill up their pay packets, and the RMT. Now, the issue with the RMT is not simply about pay. What the employers have said is, you guys have got to have less. You've got to have new, modern ways of doing things. Now, I've been through this pain at Wapping, and the printing unions had won every battle for 1,000 years. So it was no surprise that when they were defeated, there was an almighty row. The RMT, what they're saying is, we want the money, but we don't want to change the way we work. That is not acceptable. So this dispute is going to go on for, I hope, a long time until the employees win, because at the end of the day, it is the passengers who are now funding this business. With the BMA, I am less sure that there will be a deal which could be done in line with the way that the nurses and the ambulance workers, they want like 25, 27% more money. They're not going to get this. And what they have proved disgracefully, and there was 177,000 procedures and appointments scrapped over the 3 days, is they don't care what pain they put you or your relatives or your mum or dad through, right? And there is, to my knowledge, I know one person who's had a very discomforting moment over all this, and they're doctors. So if they don't care, who does care for them? So I'd love to hear a justification from either a doctor or anybody for how the BMA can possibly act in this manner. I find it absolutely disgusting and disgraceful.
Sebastian, it's hard to argue with that, isn't it? As Kelvin said, 175,000 appointments, procedures were cancelled because of the junior doctors' strike. Are they losing the moral high ground?
Well, it's hard to argue that it's disgusting and disgraceful that that happened. I think where it becomes much harder to agree is the idea that it's purely the fault of NHS staff. When this is a situation that the government is allowed to happen. And I mean, just to put these strikes in general perspective, public sector pay was due to increase by about 2% on average, whereas private sector pay has increased by 6%. At the same time, this is in the context of 10% inflation. So we're all worse off, and it's all because of massive strategic errors by this government. And because of poor choices in public policy that have been going on now for over 20 years or longer. If it's because of deindustrialization, it's because of weak energy policy. There's no point going on at some small group of workers. I agree. It's a poor thing when public sector workers, especially the NHS, is out on strike. They shouldn't be doing it. But the government has helped create the situation. They've created a situation in which doctors are forced to choose between living in a completely declining, underfunded system or going on strike, and neither of those outcomes are good.
Kelvin, are they greedy?
Well, I mean, let's face it. If we're talking about doctors, they are the cream of the crop. They are the prize academia with their A-level results, and they're very bright people, and they are, to my mind, worth more money. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I'm not inclined to pay them through the public purse. I don't want to see the NHS continue. If they want more money, they should go outside. And I would be delighted if there were a system of insurance or private payment where you could claim your tax, where you could claim your money back, rather than the system now where they're caught up in some rather disgraceful organised labour, of which they then send us the bill and say, you're going to pay this or we aren't going to work, we're going to let your mum die, we're not even going to look after A&E, we're not going to even look after intensive care. Do you know what? So I've seen two great shocks in my last 25 years. One is the fact that the RMT can't cause any damage at all. You want to go on strike, mate? Go on strike for as long as you like. We'll work out a way around it. But the other thing that really upsets me is the manner in which members of the NHS, particularly doctors, are prepared to say, there is no price that we won't make you pay for our pay packet. I honestly urge them, get out of the NHS and go into private.
Well, that's the thing, Sebastian. The BMA is talking about how fantastic the NHS is as a socialised system. We all pay into it. Everyone has universal care. But the doctors themselves seem to be voting with their feet, moving to places like Australia, America, where there's a totally different system where essentially the market decides how much a doctor is worth. Surely all of these strikes are a symptom of a public sector, lots of public sector services that are stuck in the past.
Well, they're certainly stuck in the past, and it's a healthcare system failure. But I do want to be careful here about this idea that we can just shift it into the private sector, because the fact is that in a modern society, the costs of health are always socialised one way or another. If you look at somewhere like America, the overall amount they spend on healthcare is vastly higher than we do at a government level, never mind the private sector. Now, I think we need more resources in the NHS, in the healthcare sector, and I'm not against finding ways to get private investment in there, whether that's public insurance, whether that's a private insurance system. I haven't closed my mind to that, but I think it's naive to think that we can individualize this, that we're all going to pay the cost one way or another of ill health, of social care, of all these things. So,
well, it would be nice if Sebastian, sorry to interrupt you, but it would be nice if there was a little bit of creative thinking and learning from best practice around the world from our government. Perhaps that's a bit too much to ask. Thank you very much indeed, both to Kelvin Mackenzie there, the former editor of The Sun and Daily Disclosure founder, and Sebastian Milbank, executive editor of The Critic. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Let me know what you think about that. We're moving on to, well, potential global financial crisis. Credit Suisse are to hold meetings to assess strategic scenarios for the firm as it enters a make-or-break weekend. The Swiss bank was thrown a $54 billion lifeline on Thursday following a collapse in its share price, which sent stock markets tumbling less than a week after Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, prompting fears of another global banking crisis. Shed some light on this, I am joined by the macroeconomist Philip Pilkington. Philip, thank you very much indeed. A lot has happened over the past week or so. Can you bring us up to date quickly?
Yeah, so obviously this kind of started with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. That was a bank that lended to venture capitalists and startups and so on in Silicon Valley. And there was a scare, there was a run on the deposits there, kind of a classic bank run, and the Federal Reserve ended up bailing out those depositors. They gave the sense that if they bailed out those depositors, that would kind of, stem the bleeding in the banking system, but that hasn't happened. We've seen other mid-sized, smaller banks like Signature in the US go down. And now Credit Suisse, which is not a small bank and it's not a kind of unusual bank like Silicon Valley Bank, it's a big player. And now they're looking effectively to get bought out, possibly by BlackRock or UBS or some combination of the two.
Now, Credit Suisse has obviously been bailed out to the tune of $44 billion. Many people would take the view that perhaps we shouldn't be bailing out banks. What view do you take?
I think the bailout of the deposit of Silicon Valley Bank was very dubious. It clearly didn't stem the bleeding. There was no reason to think it should. These were just venture capitalists who kept a lot of money in bank accounts that wasn't insured. That was their fault. That was up to them to insure that money. If you run a business, you should understand how deposit protection works. So I don't agree with that bailout. Credit Suisse might have what the central banks call systemic risk, which means that if you don't prop it up, it could cause the situation to worsen. I think there's at least an argument that Credit Suisse might have systemic risk. I don't think Silicon Valley Bank did, but this does seem, especially the Silicon Valley Bank being the first to be bailed out, to my mind, set a very bad precedent for future bailouts because it set the bar very low, and I think that's where we're headed now. As more of the.
And what does this mean for interest rates? I'm talking about Credit Suisse mostly. People were saying that the European Central Bank might not make the decision to bump them up. They did, in fact, go ahead with raising the interest rate. Will this have any impact on the Bank of England when it decides whether it's going to go ahead with a further interest rate rise?
It might. It's very hard to see in the Bank of England right now, harder than usual. But I will say that they went into this rate tightening cycle with a knowledge that it could produce problems in the banking system. Now, have those problems been worse than the Bank of England expected? I don't know. Nobody really knows except for the people sitting on the Monetary Policy Committee. There is a credible chance that they could lower the interest rates, but then they're really trapped between a rock and a hard place because contradiction between their mandate, which is to bring down inflation, and stabilizing the bank. I will say that I do expect lending conditions to tighten in the coming weeks because of all this chaos. And the Bank of England don't really have control over that. That will just be a kind of fear-based response from the banks, my feeling.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Philip Pilkington. Lots to think about there. Thank you very much. Macroeconomist taking us through what's been going on in the markets. Now, plenty more to come up this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, the Home Secretary has arrived in Rwanda as the government's deal to send asylum seekers to the country remains mired in very many legal challenges. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News, TV, online and digital radio. Now, Suella Braverman has arrived in Rwanda to reaffirm her commitment to the UK's rather controversial deportation policy. It's the Home Secretary's first visit to the African nation after her predecessor, Priti Patel, signed the agreement in April last year. That was in a bid to deter illegal small boat crossings, of course. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is in Rwanda with an update on the latest developments.
The Home Secretary's arrival here in Kigali is a very public reaffirmation of the UK and the Rwandan government's determination to push ahead with the deal to send asylum seekers here. The plan is, of course, still stuck in the British courts, and there's no doubt the government here in Rwanda has been stung in recent months by the level of criticism it's received from human rights groups and refugee charities. Suella Braverman and her counterparts here insist that's a willful misrepresentation of what the country has to offer. It has already accepted asylum seekers and other immigrants from countries in Africa and the Middle East, who the government here in Kigali say are making good lives for themselves. Indeed, growing levels of immigration are a key part of Rwanda's economic growth plan, which includes a burgeoning tech sector. The government here is prepared, they say, to take many thousands of asylum seekers if required. But of course, any move in that direction will mean many millions more of UK taxpayers' money being channeled into the economy here. More accommodation, we're told, is in the pipeline. Asylum seekers will, the UK government asserts, have access to all the legal and other support services they'll need. But even the Rwanda plan's most ardent supporters acknowledge there are compromises. This isn't yet a fully developed economy. But as far as the UK government is concerned, it is a vital component to their migration plan. Without a third country willing to take asylum seekers, that plan is almost certain to fail. Mark White with the Home Secretary in the Rwandan capital, Kigali.
Mark gets all the best jobs. Joining me now is the political commentator Reem Ibrahim and research fellow at the Bow Group, Ben Loughnane. Reem, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'll start with you. What's so bad about sending asylum seekers to Rwanda to be processed?
Well, Emily, the scheme has already cost taxpayers a whopping £140 million, and so far illegal migration numbers haven't been reduced at all. So this is partly due to the legal challenge, but also just the fact that this policy clearly is not working. It is quite unpopular politically, and theoretically there is no problem with sending people abroad when they come here illegally in the first place. But actually, when it's costing taxpayers so much and clearly isn't working, and part of this money is going towards things like food and accommodation costs. So clearly this policy is not working. What we need instead, in my view, is to outcompete those criminal gangs that are bringing people over here illegally, and actually instead introduce more legal and safe routes.
Benjamin, Reem makes a decent point there about the cost of this policy. It does seem to be enormous, and I can only imagine the cost of it will go up and up.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Reem said, up to the point where she said we need to introduce safe and legal routes. We do have safe and legal routes for legitimate asylum seekers and refugees. What we don't have are safe and legal routes for people who are not refugees, who very often are coming for economic migration reasons, or they're coming to be trafficked into criminal gangs and the black market in Britain. For those people, we don't want to introduce routes and normalise and legitimise what is a very bad practice. So we need to make sure that there's a line between legitimate refugees and people who seek to take advantage of Britain. And those people should never be allowed in. And when they do come in, they should be deported.
Well, Reem, a lot of people you said the policy wasn't particularly popular politically, but poll after poll does show that people want the government to be tough on illegal migration, tough on illegal crossings. As Benjamin said, there are safe and legal routes available. How would you end the practice of people popping into a dinghy and heading over the channel to get to the UK? We know that once they're here, it's very difficult to deport them.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the moment, these safe and legal routes for asylum seekers are predominantly for a small number of Afghan refugees, the Ukrainians, and of course those coming from Hong Kong. So there aren't necessarily the same amounts of legal routes for everyone that are sort of claiming asylum. I think that Ben is absolutely right. There are clearly people that are taking advantage of the system. We saw 1 in 4 migrants last year that came over across the channel came from Albania, which is very clearly a safe country. But I think that the key issue here is that the Home Office have been a complete and utter failure. The backlog is now upwards of 100,000 people, and of course, when those people are being put up in hotels paid for by the taxpayer, whether they're put up in hotels in the UK or being shipped off to Rwanda, is going to be costing taxpayer money. The Home Office need to clear up this backlog and just get through with it.
Ben, could this be a distraction from the fact that the Home Office is fundamentally incompetent and unable to process claims quick enough?
Absolutely. You said it, not I, but I couldn't agree more. The Home Office, I think, for a long time has been a glutted department. I think it needs to be broken down into 2 or 3 departments. I think there's far too much that falls under the Home Secretary's responsibilities to properly, focus on all of those things. So illegal migration should really be the job of, first of all, the Foreign Secretary needs to do diplomatic relations with France, for example, to prevent the people leaving in the first place. The Prime Minister really bears the brunt of the responsibility. And I do think sometimes Suella Braverman gets a bit of stick. She ends up bearing the brunt of all of this responsibility when really it's the Prime Minister who needs to step up and solve this.
That's true. I mean, Reem, a lot of accusations to the government from illegal activists, from charity groups, from members of the public has been about the language used. Do you think Suella Braverman should she be using forceful, forthright language, if we put it that way? Or does she need to demonstrate more compassion to those who she wishes to vote for the Conservative government?
Well, I honestly think that language doesn't necessarily matter, and that's where I think a lot of these...
Oh, we've lost Reem. Oh no, Benjamin, would you like to take it away? What are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think the language matters. I think it's a distraction. It's a very easy thing to say, oh no, stop being so nasty to these people, stop using words like that. But the reality is, it's a big problem. It needs to be solved. And if you distract by talking about the semantics of the issue rather than the actual issue itself, you can delay it and kick the can down the road. And I think that's what they're doing. It's very cynical.
Well, it does seem like the government, if they don't get this agreement with Rwanda sorted and those flights off the ground, their whole new legislation that's going through will, crumble as well. We wait to see what happens. Thank you very much indeed. Benjamin Loughnane from the Bow Group, a research fellow there, and Reem Ibrahim, who was on the other line, but she seems to have stalled there, disappeared. You're GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up after the break, Rishi Sunak is expected to give Tory MPs a free vote on Boris Johnson's future in politics if a committee finds he misled Parliament about those lockdown parties. But first, before we discuss that, let's get a check on the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
It is 2:34. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. As you have been hearing, the Home Secretary's defended a plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda after the government confirmed 200 people crossed the channel yesterday following 5 days of inactivity. Suella Braverman is in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, where she's been given a tour of the housing site that will provide long-term accommodation for refugees. As she maintains the government's deportation policy, which has faced some criticism, will act as a powerful deterrent for those considering dangerous journeys in small boats. The Home Secretary also visited a training and education centre where she addressed some of the graduates.
Absolutely delighted and excited about our partnership with Rwanda to be creating a vibrant community here, to be a positive, secure, beautiful haven and home for many thousands of people. And I'm really excited about the contribution that these talented graduates will be making to the prosperity of Rwanda and the security of many, many people.
Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday, and writing on his site, Truth Social, he called on his supporters to protest and take the nation back. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is likely to bring charges against the former US president over an alleged hush money payment made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. It was in the run-up to the 2016 election. Well, the twice impeached former president has criticised the Attorney's Office for being politically motivated and corrupt. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is visiting Crimea to mark the 9th anniversary of its annexation from Ukraine. Moscow seized the territory in 2014, 8 years before launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kyiv has vowed to expel Russia from Crimea and all of its occupied territories. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. But Real Britain will be back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Let me know what you think about the Rwanda policy. Do you think it's workable now? Because it's cost us £140 million so far. Is that money put to good use if it does work? Let me know what you think. This is Real Britain on GB News TV, online and digital radio. Now, moving on, our political panel is with us. We're going to be discussing Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak is expected to give Tory MPs a free vote on his future in politics if a privileges committee finds that he misled Parliament about those Downing Street parties. The former Prime Minister is preparing to appear at a televised hearing on Wednesday where he will try to convince other MPs that he was not in contempt of the Commons when he denied claims about lockdown rule breaking. If the committee does find Johnson guilty, he could be suspended from the Commons. But is the Prime Minister right to give a free vote? Joining me now to discuss this is political commentator and playwright Emma Burnell. And live in the studio is writer and commentator Connor Tomlinson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today on Real Britain. Connor, I will start with you. Some of Johnson's allies have said that this whole inquiry into the Partygate and so on, into Boris Johnson's future, whether he misled Parliament, etc., has become a bit of a witch hunt. Do you have sympathy with that view?
I can see how it looks like a stitch-up. I mean, we can see when Sue Gray was offered the Chief of Staff job for Keir Starmer, it didn't exactly look very impartial. I do think impartiality in Whitehall is a bit of a misnomer because it's obvious you're going to get into politics for some sort of party or ideological affiliation, but neither here nor there. Point being, I think Rishi Sunak is right to give a free vote and not whip them into shape, but I do think in part it's because both Boris and the very unpopular Matt Hancock at the moment are going to be scapegoats to take the fall for what has been a disastrous policy with lockdown and money printing. Most people in there voted for it. Lots of the MPs didn't want to abide by the rules. Lots of MPs, including Rishi Sunak, attended these sort of cabinet events. Even Keir Starmer had a beer. All sorts of things, right?
And a curry.
Yeah, exactly. If they can pin it purely on Boris and Matt for the wider eyes of the public, they think they can get away with it. I think it will backfire because, like it or not, and I'm not a big Boris fan anymore, but lots of the general public still think he's an election winner.
Emma, you are shaking your head there. I'm guessing that you don't think this is all a witch hunt aided and abetted by Labour.
Are you actually kidding me? I mean, seriously. I mean, Connor's doing his best. I know there's so little meat to this. He's got to do what he can to make the other side of this argument, but are you kidding me? This is not an inquiry into COVID. There is another inquiry into COVID. It will run and run. It will probably run too long. That's what public inquiries do. But this is an inquiry into the Partygate scandals. And frankly, we all know before we go into it who the guilty parties are. Boris Johnson screwed up. He did.
Well,
he's not a big player, weirdly, but he is a big person that wants people to like him.
Well, Connor, I mean, that's true. There is the photo evidence there that these allegations are, of course, based on. Is he not banged to rights?
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that, which is why I'm very confused with why Emma says I'm trying to defend the Tory party. Again, I wanted Boris to resign because he put lockdown in the first place. My point is, I don't think, even if in principle you give the MPs a vote on this to oust Boris, I think that this political move is not done on principle to get rid of Boris because lots of them did the same thing. This political move will backfire because lots of the members of the general public do not think like me and they don't think like Emma. They still think, oh, well, he tried his best and he's better than either Liz Truss, who everyone thinks screwed up the economy, or Rishi Sunak, who nobody wanted in the first place. So what they're going to do, the Conservatives, if they think by getting rid of Boris, they'll get rid of the sort of smell around them at the next election, no, they'll just cement the Labour win.
Emma, is this a case of what democracy trumps which democracy? Because he, of course, has been reselected only a couple of days ago for his constituency. Would it be right then for Rishi Sunak to allow Conservative MPs to essentially decide his political fate?
I mean, yes. Who cares? He's a stupid man. He's a singular man. the idea that Boris Johnson should be the front person for the Tory party is the worst thing that's ever happened to the Tory party.
The worst thing that ever happened to the Tory party, Connor?
Wouldn't say that. I'm not a big fan of neoliberalism myself, but there you go. I find it quite interesting, though, when you say about which democracy trumps which democracy, because the actual panel at the Privileges Committee, I have noticed that two of the members of the panel, obviously it's a Conservative majority, but most of the members of the panel are out-and-out Boris critics. Two of the members are also going. They're not standing for re-election, which is Harriet Harman and the other Conservative gentleman, Sir, I forget his name. So they also don't feel any kind of political pressure from the public about how this is going to be perceived. So you may genuinely have a case here of the party trying to get rid and jettison Boris because they think he's a bad move, but the public don't like it. And also the Whitehall types and the MPs on the Privileges Committee who have no repercussions for this also want to get rid of him just because they don't like him.
Now, Emma, there were, of course, many people who thought the way Boris Johnson, well, his career as Prime Minister ended was undemocratic insofar as he was the one who got elected on the initial mandate, which was a very big one. Can you see, even if you don't agree, why some people might see this again as being a bit of a stitch-up that trumps, well, basic democracy?
Shall we remind ourselves of exactly why Boris got deselected? He got deselected because he kept sending MPs onto the media to defend his ideas around Chris Princher, who was accused of poor behaviour, let's put it that way, and he couldn't find a line. Boris Johnson did not lose over Brexit, over any of the things that he is absolutely on side with a majority of the public with. He lost because he kept sending his own staff onto the media to say things they didn't believe and they couldn't hold a line on. And ultimately, that's a terrible, terrible managerial decision.
Well, yes, Connor, I think you could certainly say that. I mean, Rishi Sunak now, as the new Prime Minister, he promised integrity, he promised to be honest, which of course most politicians do promise to be, but it does seem like he's making progress in what he's set out to do and his people's priorities and so on and so forth. I don't think he particularly wants to be involved in any of this. He's got to keep his distance and present himself as someone who is above all this nonsense.
Yeah, that's why he's given them a free vote. And also then, I think what he's probably calculated is, I don't want to be the executioner for Boris's political career. So if the MPs do that, then it's out of my hands, and hopefully the public don't give me too much backlash. I think that's a very Westminster bubble level analysis on his part, if that's the case, because most people look at it as red team v blue team, and if blue team get rid of the guy I don't like, then okay, I'll vote for this team. I don't think Rishi Sunak has been quite as successful as perhaps you're allowing him to say, because like most politicians, he keeps saying that he's going to address things like the small boats, and yes, they've just passed legislation, but I won't hold my breath on that really and actually doing it.
Well, Connor, some people might say, you know, give him a chance.
I think
anyway,
we have.
Anyway, we're going. Some people who are nice and positive, with a positive outlook, might say that anyway. Anyway, we're going to move on to our next topic. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. The ICC says the Russian president is responsible for war crimes. They focus its claims on the unlawful deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. The alleged crimes were committed when Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February of last year. Moscow has, of course, since denied the allegations and labelled the warrants as, in quotes, outrageous. So back again with me is Connor Tomlinson and Emma Burnell. Emma, I'll start with you this time. What does this mean? This is a symbol that the international community is, well, standing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that it will mean anything substantive, but in terms of as you say, the way that it looks, it's very important. We are saying so far and no further. So far and no further. And what Russia has done, not just the way that it's invaded Ukraine, but the things that it's done in that invasion are appalling and horrific. And we should not allow that. And they are technically someone who is one of our rich nations, and we should say we don't accept that.
Connor, do you agree?
I think it's all well and good to denounce obviously immoral actions, but my question is, what's the actual enforcement behind this going to be? Like, nobody is going to, and I'll eat my hat gladly if this happens, but nobody's going to march into the Kremlin and haul Putin out in cuffs anytime soon. Any MP or Senator Lindsey Graham in America saying Putin could be assassinated at any moment, it's a total pipe dream, right? And so what I think, unfortunately, is going to happen is this is going to be an impediment to de-escalation, and the only people that are going to suffer are the Ukrainian people, including the children that are currently being abducted, which is the reason that this has been given, the Russian conscripts who don't want to fight in the first place, and citizens of the UK, US and Europe who are being forced to pay the pockets of the military-industrial complex as this war is drawn out. So the civilians don't get anything out of it, but the people in power get to say what good people we are.
Well, Emma, Connor made one good point there, I think. He said, well, does this actually have teeth? Is this actually going to do anything meaningful? Because, of course, Russia is not a member country of the ICC, as we know, and therefore the ICC, the court in The Hague, has no authority in that country. So it's highly, highly unlikely that this will do anything besides potentially allowing international actors to virtue signal.
Okay, the thing is, virtue signalling, as you call it, is actually quite important. Signalling that this is what we like, this is who we are, this is what we want. This is what our markets will accept, this is what our people will accept. None of these things are bad things. So it's actually okay for us to use mechanisms like the International Criminal Court to say, you are outside of those values that we believe in.
Also, it does mean, Connor, that if he did, now I don't expect this to happen, but if he did step foot, if Putin did step foot in any of the 123 member countries of the International Criminal Court, then he could be arrested.
Sure, but I don't think an ex-KGB agent would be so daft. Also, it is all well and good saying we obviously agree that abducting children and waging war is bad. Right, got it. So do I. It has material consequences, and the longer you prolong this war and the further you drive Russia over to the BRICS nations, including China, and Saudi Arabia going off the petrodollar, and they're going to start trading oil between themselves, and when we need oil, they're going to reroute it through India, because they're a partner of both of them and us, and we're going to be paying through the nose, and then the English taxpayer and all the rest of the people in Europe are going to be paying an unbelievable amount.
Hang on, Connor. The reason why fundamentally Western liberal democratic nations are giving military aid to the Ukraine, are lending their support, are taking refugees from that country, is because they want to stand up for the freedoms that make our country free and make Western Europe free and makes parts of Eastern Europe free.
I don't agree. And I think we've seen so many of the military-industrial complex going throughout the Middle East, waging wars, mainly for resources, but also net zero is a policy which they've already all agreed on. And if you do things like blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and disrupt reliable gas supplies and make it really expensive, you give yourself a really convenient excuse to keep pressing forward on that policy. And if everything's really expensive, you can look to a crisis and say, this is the reason everything is so expensive, and not our poorly managed economy on the government side.
Well, I would say that was just an unintended consequence of Russia waging war on Ukraine. But Emma, now I don't know, there have been 3 of these arrest warrants issued to presidents in the past. I think, now I've listened to you both, I think I will agree with you, Emma, that virtue signalling on this is, well, at best, very important, symbolic, and will inspire countries to support Ukraine further. And at worst, yes, a bit pointless or meaningless in terms of practice. But when, countries can come together and show allegiance against a despotic, authoritarian regime, that's only a good thing.
It is. And I'd like to take us back to what Connor was just saying. The idea that we're only going to do net zero because some terrible despotic country threatens us. That's the reason to do net zero. That's literally the whole game plan right there. We need to be energy independent. We need to have our own energy delivery and complete.
To you, Emma. I'm very sorry. We've run out of time, but thank you very much. We'll get the opinions of our viewers on that one. I'm sure they'll have some. Political commentator and playwright Emma Burnell and writer and commentator Connor Tomlinson. Lots to think about there. Now coming up, we will be... This is Real Britain, of course. There's plenty more coming up on today's show. We're going to have to go to the weather first, though.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. A grey, damp and breezy day today for many of us, but it is much milder for the vast majority compared with recent days. We've got a number of weather fronts moving through. We've already seen a warm front move through. That's brought the milder air from the southwest with it. Tightly packed isobars, gusty winds and a cold front pushing in from the afternoon with some spells of rain on it, initially affecting northern and western England, parts of Wales, as well as much as Scotland. A damp afternoon to come here with gusty winds as well. Some brighter skies ahead of that front for East Anglia and the southeast, and brighter skies as it clears Northern Ireland, although as temperatures rise to 15 or even 16 Celsius here, we could see some sharp showers or even a few rumbles of thunder into the afternoon and evening. And those showers will spread into central and southern Scotland during the evening as well, so some hefty downpours. But across central and southern parts of England, we've got spells of rain as the cold front slows down. The rain easing for a time during the early hours, but a lot of cloud about, and with the cloud and that air coming from the south and southwest, it is going to be a mild night away from the far north. Low single figures for Shetland, but otherwise for the vast majority, mid to high single figures. Rainfall returns across southern and southeast England as we begin Friday, an area of rain clearing slowly through the morning. Elsewhere, a lot of showers occurring, some heavy downpours with hail possible across central and southern parts of England, but in between, some sunny spells, and it's another warm afternoon with temperatures reaching 16, possibly even 17 Celsius in some central and northeastern parts. The showers continue for a time on Friday evening, and actually there'll be some longer spells of rain across parts of western Scotland into northern Scotland later as well. But it's another mild night, and so on Saturday we start off with that mild air. A lot of cloud again on Saturday with spells of rain, especially in the north. Drier on Sunday.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Camilla Tominey Show this Sunday morning from 9:30.
But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether.
6 months after delivering his own mini-budget, Liz Truss's Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will be giving me his reaction to this week's budget. You won't want to miss it. All that and more with me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday morning from 9:30.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on TV, online and digital radio. Now, coming up this hour, we will have a fiery debate on whether mums should go to work or whether they should stay at home to raise their children. That's after the Chancellor announced working parents in England will receive free childcare for children under 5. We'll also hear from our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's currently in Rwanda. That's on the government's plan to tackle channel migration. And should TikTok be banned full stop in the UK? That's after it was announced it won't be allowed on government phones. We'll be debating that too with a few experts. Plenty more coming up on the show, but first, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it's 3:01. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary's defended a plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda after the government confirmed 200 people crossed the channel yesterday following 5 days of inactivity. So Ella Braverman's in the Rwandan capital, Kigali. She's been given a tour of the housing site there, which will provide long-term accommodation for refugees. She maintains the government's deportation policy, which has been criticised, will act as a powerful deterrent for those considering dangerous journeys in small boats. The Home Secretary has also visited a training and education centre where she addressed some of the graduates.
We are absolutely delighted and excited about our partnership with Rwanda to be creating a vibrant community here, to be a positive, secure, beautiful haven and home for many thousands of people. And I'm really excited about the contribution that these talented graduates will be making to the prosperity of Rwanda and the security of many, many people.
Well, Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday, and writing on his Truth Social site, he called on his supporters to protest and to take the nation back. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is likely to bring charges against the former president over an alleged hush money payment it claims was made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels in the run-up to the 2016 election. Now, the twice impeached former president has criticised the attorney's office for being corrupt and politically motivated. The SNP's chief executive has resigned with immediate effect. It follows reports Peter Murrell, who is also Nicola Sturgeon's husband, was facing the threat of a vote of no confidence following a row over the party's membership numbers. In a statement, he said, while there was no intent to mislead, he accepts that has been the outcome. Michael Russell will oversee the operation of the SNP's headquarters on an interim basis. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is visiting Crimea to mark the 9th anniversary of its annexation from Ukraine. Moscow seized the territory in 2014, 8 years before launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kyiv has vowed to expel Russia from Crimea and all of its occupied territories. Passengers will face further rail misery unless the government offers new money in union negotiations. That's the warning from the RMT, as thousands of its members at 14 train operators have walked out for the second time in the space of 3 days. It's led to widespread travel disruption, with fewer than 50% of train services across the country expected to run. RMT's General Secretary Mick Lynch says transport ministers need to follow the example of their colleagues in the Department of Health.
We need a change. We need the government to make a change in attitude. There's a bit of that this week we've seen in the health service and maybe in the teachers' unions. The difference in those deals is that there are no conditions. It's new money, but our members are having to swallow or expected to swallow vast changes to their working conditions, and they're not prepared to do that in order to get a very modest, poor pay rise.
Meanwhile, thousands of bus drivers in the West Midlands will go on an indefinite strike from Monday. Unite members employed by National Express backed the walkouts by 71%. The strike will affect local bus services in the West Midlands, though, not the scheduled white coaches. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has appeared in court on charges of corruption. Police stormed his residence in Lahore earlier this morning, and this was the scene outside court. It follows days of standoffs outside his property in Lahore. Police attempted to arrest him there and failed on Tuesday. He is accused of unlawfully selling state gifts given to him by foreign dignitaries while in office. Gary Lineker says the support from his colleagues at the BBC has been hugely gratifying and quite beautiful. The Match of the Day presenter was taken off air last week after comparing the language used to launch the government's new illegal migrants policy with that of 1930s Germany. But he returns later to cover the FA Cup quarter-final between Manchester City and Burnley. This is GB News. More as it happens. Now, back to Real Britain.
Yes, welcome back to Real Britain. Here's what's coming up on the show. We'll debate whether mums should go to work or whether they should stay at home to raise their children. That's after the Chancellor announced working parents in England will receive 33 hours of childcare for children as young as 9 months old. GB News' latest People's poll found that the public is in favour of the government reducing the cost of childcare. We'll be debating that. We'll also hear from our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who is currently out in Rwanda. He's on the government's plan to tackle channel migration. We'll also get reaction from the director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity think tank, Stephen Wolfe, and the SNP's trouble with the SNP. Chief Executive Peter Murrell, who is married to Nicola Sturgeon, has resigned over a row concerning the party's membership. The party has recently suffered a considerable drop in its membership numbers. We'll speak with the political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, Michael Blackley. Is the SNP falling apart? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on today's topics. Please do tweet me at GB News, or you can email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also watch us online on YouTube. Don't go away, I'll be back in a tick. Yes, so one of the biggest stories of the day, Suella Braverman has arrived in Rwanda. She's there to reaffirm her commitment to the UK's deportation policy. It is the first time the Home Secretary has visited the African nation after her predecessor, Priti Patel, signed the agreement in April last year. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is in Rwanda with an update on the latest developments.
The Home Secretary's arrival here in Kigali is a very public reaffirmation of the UK and the Rwandan government's determination to push ahead with the deal to send asylum seekers here. The plan is, of course, still stuck in the British courts, and there's no doubt the government here in Rwanda has been stung in recent months by the level of criticism it's received from human rights groups and refugee charities. Suella Braverman and her counterparts here insist that's a willful misrepresentation of what the country has to offer. It has already accepted asylum seekers and other immigrants from countries in Africa and the Middle East, who the government here in Kigali say are making good lives for themselves. Indeed, growing levels of immigration are a key part of Rwanda's economic growth plan, which includes a burgeoning tech sector. The government here is prepared, they say, to take many thousands of asylum seekers if required. But of course, any move in that direction will mean many millions more of UK taxpayers' money being channeled into the economy here. More accommodation, we're told, is in the pipeline. Asylum seekers will, the UK government asserts, have access to all the legal and other support services they'll need. But even the Rwanda plan's most ardent supporters acknowledge there are compromises. This isn't yet a fully developed economy. But as far as the UK government is concerned, it is a vital component to their migration plan. Without a third country willing to take asylum seekers, that plan is almost certain to fail. Mark White with the Home Secretary in the Rwandan capital, Kigali.
Mark White there, bringing us up to date. But joining me now is Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe. Stephen, so since last time we talked, Suella Braverman has got on a flight herself, arrived in Rwanda. Do we have any idea of what progress is being made? Because there were people who were saying, were there not, that Rwanda only has space for a couple of hundred of migrants from this country. But Suella is saying, no, thousands.
Well, I think it's very clear that the fact that Suella Braverman is on a flight and is in the capital, Kigali, talking about this, is an indication that there are moves in the Home Office to actually expand the programme and indeed include thousands of those who will be taken under the new migration partnership deal to Rwanda. And I say that on top of communications I've had with the Centre of Migration with the Home Office that has talked about that in the next few weeks, they will start to deliver more information about potential third-party partners other than Rwanda, maybe even those within our own kind of British sovereignty nations that we've seen, maybe other countries in Africa. They aren't indicating which countries. They are going to indicate that there are going to be more flights. There's going to be more staff to help with the deportations. And they're indicating other legal aspects that will be added to the bill as amendments. So this is real progress being made by the Home Secretary. And she wouldn't be out there if she really didn't believe that there will be more beds, more rooms, and more availability and opportunity to remove more channel migrants.
Well, that's very interesting indeed, Stephen, if what you say is true, that more agreements could be on the cards with other countries. That would be quite significant indeed, considering many people, naysayers of this policy, have been saying, oh, it will be near impossible for us to get more of these agreements. Where are they, etc., etc. But behind closed doors, is it right to say that the government is very much making that happen?
Well, I think it's very clear that they're very enthused by it, and they were indicating that they are making progress. And certainly they wouldn't be making comments like that to numbers of us who were on a call if they didn't believe that they have some serious attempts. Now, that does not mean that what attempts they're doing will work out in the end. It just means that they feel that there is an opportunity for them to expand this program to other countries or maybe British overseas territories. So I think that's quite significant. But the real point about this and what's been happening with Rishi Sunak, with the new law and the migration partnership with Rwanda, is that there is a real determination now within the top of the Conservative Party to tackle this problem. They recognise it as a potential vote winner in any general election in the future, but they also know that now it needs be, because it's £8 billion a year is the cost of immigration and asylum to the UK.
So, Stephen, so you say UK overseas territories, others may be on the card for these third-party agreements. Does that mean places like Gibraltar, Falklands, Bermuda?
Oh, well, we've got no idea which places they are. We can look at the British overseas. I think the main point that was being made is that nothing is being ruled out and there are opportunities across the globe for them to look at. So I think it's a very important step that the Home Office is really practically looking at the legal implications of what happened with the attempts previously to prevent people from coming across the channel. And they've done a really good job in this new law, and my hats off as a fellow barrister to those in the government legal department. They do expect legal challenges, but I think they're prepared for that. They're looking at the technology that's required, the staffing costs. And so my only question is whether they are really thinking about this in a long-term plan, because we are expecting 80,000 to come this year, unless, and I feel that it might do, unless the deal that's been happening in Rwanda and also the law that's been implemented by Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman does start to have an impact on the people smugglers and their business model.
Yeah, so how does this actually fit? If you could just break it down, just very quickly, how does this Rwanda scheme fit with the illegal immigration bill that's going through, with the agreement with France that Rishi Sunak seems to have agreed with President Macron, and whatever else is being done to stop the boats?
So the key point here is the people smugglers' business plan is get on our boats, give us the money, and you will get into the UK. You'll never be turned away. You'll never be taken anywhere else, and you'll be in hotels, and then you'll be there in the UK forever. The new immigration bill says, no, you'll be there for 28 days, and after 28 days assessment, unless you fall within the very minor categories which allow you to stay in the UK, you'll be removed from the country and not be permitted to claim asylum again. Rwanda fits in because it's one of those areas where you can be removed after 28 days. So that's an important point. And what's happening with Macron is they're going to disrupt and make it more difficult for the boats to try and reach the waters in the first place. Maybe we'll see more images of the police actually capturing the boats and puncturing, the drones working together. So on both sides, it's to make the journey more difficult and therefore more costly for the people smugglers, and a disincentive for those who are paying the money to the people smugglers, saying that you won't be able to stay in the UK. Actually, you're going to, in the first case, go to Rwanda, and in the second case, maybe one of the other deals they're considering.
Well, there's certainly a huge amount of effort going into this, and of course they'll be looking at the public opinion polls that are showing people want the small boats very much to stop. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen Wolfe, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. There we go. Now, moving on. A report due to be published on Tuesday will say the Metropolitan Police is riddled with sexism, racism and homophobia, and has failed to change despite a number of official reviews urging it to do so. The force commissioned the report back in 2021. That was after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving Met officer, Wayne Couzens. One senior official has described the findings as, in quotes, atrocious. To shed some more light on this, I'm now joined by the former Surrey Police and Crime Commissioner, Kevin Hurley. Kevin, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. What are we expecting from this report? It looks pretty damning.
Well, I think it's what you've already trailed out there, but all I've got to say about it is welcome to British society. That's what British society is like. And probably the one thing we can say about the Metropolitan Police, for all the kickings it's getting at the moment, is probably slightly less worse than the average elements of British society, because the police do, in fact, vet everyone who joins it. One would only need, if you like, to look at what goes on in the health service. A number of doctors who are convicted and charged of sexually assaulting people, different nurses murdering children up and down the years, doctors murdering people, NHS employees having sex with dead bodies. You know, let's get real and understand what's happening here. The police merely replicate society. I'm very worried what I see going on, and that is a major attack on the morale and motivation of the police service, which means we will all be less safe. Because the thing that people forget about police, it's the only job in the country where you need to deal with confrontation on a daily basis. And if people lose the will and commitment to go forward and deal with confrontation, there's actually nothing we, society, can do about that. So I have a message for Mark Rowley, Lynn Owens, the current Deputy Commissioner. Stop all this grandstanding. Get behind your people. Stop letting them be openly criticised all the time and stand up for them, because your best people are actually leaving early, and it's being filled up by Boris's newbies who know nothing, no life experience. That's why the police product we all receive now is so poor very often.
So, Kevin, you think the police, it simply reflects a society that's, going down in terms of standards, a society that's riddled with sexism, racism and homophobia?
Well, I'm not saying it's going down in terms of standards, but that's how society is. You know, having myself been in the military, worked in insurance offices, worked in hotels and shops, and indeed even in the media, the kind of banter and talk that one hears amongst colleagues down the football club, rugby club, is no different. Sadly, that's the way human beings are. But what I would say about the police service is because there's quite a strong and powerful selection process, despite what everyone says, they are probably less representative of those antisocial behaviours. But my message is, the more we kick the police, the worse they're going to be at protecting us.
Kevin, I have some sympathy with that view. I do feel like if you demonise police officers, that is certainly not to the benefit of our society as a whole. But surely, considering recent cases, Wayne Couzens being one of them, they do deserve a kicking. Why weren't other police officers standing up for standards and, you know, putting pressure against these type of men?
Well, for the first time in British history of policing, which is 200 years, there's been a psychopathic rapist murderer. That's a big surprise for us all, but it actually has been replicated amongst people within the health service, military, and other elements of society. So, frankly, we shouldn't get too vexed about that. There is a concern that within his small group, they had unpleasant WhatsApp chats going on. That was bad. But the big lesson for me about Wayne Couzens is he should have been caught earlier when he was flashing, because flashing for me as a senior detective is a precursor to people going on to be rapists and murderers.
Kevin, I think people are worried that...
Let me just finish. What that tells me is how poor police investigations have become, that those inquiries of allegations of flashing were not dealt with urgently, because in days gone by they would have done.
As someone who's observing this, it does also smack of corruption. Clearly, people looking out at police officers protecting other police officers.
Well, it doesn't. How does it smack of corruption? What we know is that a couple of rapes were not a couple of flashings were not investigated promptly due to bureaucratic incompetence and the investigative processes within the police being run down so badly, like so many other hundreds of thousands of crimes. Unfortunately, Wayne Couzens should have been caught earlier, but it's got nothing to do with corruption. It's got to do with police cuts and incompetence.
Right, incompetence, not corruption. Thank you very much indeed, Kevin Hurley, former Surrey Police and Crime Commissioner. Thank you very much for your time indeed. Now we are going to be moving on. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain after the break. An official report is expected to say the Metropolitan Police, oh, we've already done that. I'm not sure where we're going now, but we're going to go to the weather.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News TV, online and digital radio. Now, moving to the States, the former President Donald Trump has claimed on his social media platform that he is expecting to be arrested this week. Trump says the arrest is due to take place on Tuesday over an alleged payment to a former porn star. He's urged his supporters to protest over the alleged arrest if it is true and proceeded to a criminal case. It would be the first one ever brought against a former US president. Let's speak now to Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas. Greg, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. What's your reaction to this?
Great to be here, Emily. Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, there must have, I don't know if there was a leak in the police department, the local department or whatever, but, you know, this is just another attempt at getting to Trump. You know, Trump derangement syndrome is alive and well, in spite of the fact that it's been, you know, over 2 years since he was in office. So, look, a lot of these DAs especially the Southern New York, ran their campaigns with the slogan, "I'm going to get Trump." You know, so it doesn't surprise me that, you know, if the police car follows you long enough, you will blow a stop sign. It doesn't mean that he's perfect, and there's no doubt that, you know, some of this stuff, some of these cases, you know, will ultimately have an effect of dragging him down if that's their purpose. Although, in many respects, it actually elevates Trump in terms of his standing in the Republic, at least in the early stages of the Republican race for the nomination, where, you know, he ends up being the victim, is what I'm getting at. So, you know, I don't think this will work. I think it will backfire ultimately, especially in a week where, you know, you had really dramatic revelations about the Biden family cartel. And I think there's going to be a bit of whataboutism here in the next few weeks.
It may backfire. He can present himself as a victim. But is it wise for him to be posting social media calling for protests to take the nation back? There's the tweet on the screen.
Mean, that's the way President Trump operates. You know, he's very bold. He loves social media. You know, he used it to his advantage in 2016, that's for sure. And so, you know, this will ultimately play to his, you know, Trump the victim, and the left, the radical left is out to get me kind of thing. And that plays well to his base. And so, you know, in many ways, I think it helps him, frankly. And I think if he would, you know, if the Democrats were smart, they would just let the electoral process work. And if they really want Trump to run, they should just admit it, like they did in many other races in 2022, especially where they actually funded candidates that they in the Republican primaries that they wanted to run against. So, you know, it's a little bit of it's a little bit confusing, but I do think that ultimately Trump derangement syndrome is going to backfire, I think.
Yes, the obsession continues, much like, actually, the obsession with Boris Johnson here in the UK. It does continue on and on. Not as though those two can compare to one another, but ever so slightly with the derangement that we see. Thank you very much indeed, Greg Swenson from Republican Overseas.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your time. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, we're talking TikTok. It's been banned from the UK government's phones, from every minister's phones, amid security concerns around the Chinese-owned video app. But first, let's get a check on the news headlines.
Hi there, I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. It's coming up to 3:30. The Home Secretary has defended a plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda after the government confirmed more than 200 people crossed the channel yesterday following 5 days of inactivity. Suella Braverman is in the capital, Kigali, where she's been given a tour of a housing site which will provide long-term accommodation for refugees. She maintains the government's deportation policy, which has been criticised, will act as a powerful deterrent for those considering making dangerous journeys in small boats. The Home Secretary also visited a training and education centre where she addressed some of the graduates.
We are absolutely delighted and excited about our partnership with Rwanda to be creating a vibrant community here, to be a positive, secure, beautiful haven and home for many thousands of people. And I'm really excited about the contribution that these talented graduates will be making to the prosperity of Rwanda and the security of many, many people.
Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday, and writing on his Truth Social site, he called on his supporters to protest and take the nation back. Manhattan's District Attorney's Office is likely to bring charges against the former US president over an alleged hush money payment made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. It was in the run-up to the 2016 election. Now, no former president has ever faced criminal charges. Trump, who's been impeached twice, says the attorney's office is corrupt and highly political. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is visiting Crimea to mark the 9th anniversary of its annexation from Ukraine. Moscow seized the territory in 2014, 8 years before launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kyiv has vowed to expel Russia from Crimea and all of its occupied territories. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. But don't go anywhere. Emily will be back with Real Britain in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Yes, welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News TV, online and digital radio. Now, the UK government is cracking down on one of the most popular social media platforms. If you don't know it, TikTok is essentially a social media platform that people all over the world post videos, post clips, post, well, anything that they might post also on Facebook. But essentially, there are millions, if not billions, of videos on there, uploaded every single day. Anyway, it's been banned on all government devices issued to ministers and civil servants. Comes after the National Cybersecurity Centre published a review alleging that the app could be harvesting data for the ruling Chinese Communist Party. But is the social media app just for harmless dance crazes, or is there something much more sinister at play? Should politicians even be on social media? That's another question to ask. With me to debate this is political commentator and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, Charlotte Littlewood. Also joining me is author and broadcaster Rebecca Reid. Charlotte, why has the government decided to do this, do you think?
Well, we've been a little bit slow to act, haven't we? I mean, we've had Brussels do this, Denmark do this, the USA, Canada, European Commission and Parliament. And now, yes, we have eventually decided that it's very important for our national security to not have hostile states able to access and harvest data, potentially sensitive data, of our government officials.
Well, Rebecca, as a consumer of TikTok, I imagine, I am also guilty of using TikTok as well, although mostly for browsing functions. Do you think this is a lot of hot air?
I mean, I just can never bring myself to be concerned about my data being harvested by anybody. Like, if they want the nonsense that I create in my data, they are welcome to it. All they're going to find out is me Googling, like, 15 signs that a guy's messaging you back for not messaging you back for a good reason. Like, there's nothing useful to steal from my phone.
Well, there you go. I mean, Charlotte, OK, that might appear a little bit flippant from Rebecca, perhaps. But there is a point to this insofar as China clearly has their fingers in a lot of pies. They're also very much embedded in a lot of our infrastructure. TikTok is just one of very many ways in which they could harvest data, infiltrate, find out secrets, state secrets, etc., etc.
Absolutely, but we should be making an effort to prevent risks where we can. And it isn't just TikTok. We still have Confucius Institutes operating inside universities that have known links to Chinese Communist Party, so organisations. So I think, you know, when it comes to TikTok, we know that it has the ability to access our hard drive. And we know that actually 4 members of staff were fired from ByteDance, the company that owns TikTok, because they were doing just that, geolocating US journalists that had been investigating TikTok and its links to China. So we know it has the ability to do it, and we know it has done it, and this is national security. I'm really uninterested in seeing Matt Hancock flip pancakes, to be really honest, and I think we can sacrifice that for the sake of the security of our state.
A collective sacrifice. Rebecca, Perhaps this is a good move. It's different from banning every single person in the country from uploading a dance TikTok onto the platform. Should really Grant Shapps be old enough and big enough to realise that perhaps national security is more important than him gaining a few younger followers?
I actually think there is an argument that politicians shouldn't be allowed to have social media full stop completely. And I think we might be in a better political situation if they weren't allowed to have second jobs and they weren't allowed to have social media. How many of them would actually be in it for any reason other than self-publication and trying to make loads of money? But no, I think in terms of security, I'm sure we are probably desperately lax. I think we're a fairly rubbish country when it comes to investing in new things. So I suppose all I would say is that I'd like a world in which our main communications aren't all done over WhatsApp, which seems to be the most leakable thing in the entire world, and where we maybe have such robust cybersecurity that people can still have TikTok, because I worry that there is a slippery slope towards getting rid of it completely. And I'd be sad about that, A, because I like to waste time on it, and B, I do think there's genuine good to come of TikTok and other social media platforms. And in America, they did ban it briefly for a while, and teenagers were very upset about it. And emotionally, that's, I'm a teenager, so I would be pretty devastated.
Well, there you go. I mean, Charlotte, this is taking you slightly off your brief as a national security expert, but do you think it's good for our political discourse to have our politicians so addicted to social media? I guess most of us are, but if you look at politicians when they're standing up in the House of Commons, for example, they seem to create these speeches, write these speeches that are aimed purely for social media and clickbait, and also when they try to implement a policy, how many U-turns have we had because they listen to the noise on Twitter rather than actually public opinion?
I mean, that seems to speak to not very good politicians, to be honest, because I do think there is a place for social media applications like Twitter to be able to reach new audiences. But we do expect from our politicians that they're actually engaging with facts and research and not being led by social media. That's hugely concerning. So I do think there is a space for politicians on social media, but we need to be really intelligent about how we use that. Our intelligence around the threat we face with social media in these apps is very low, and we need to behave on our devices as if anyone could be looking at any time. And I think that's something that maybe government officials need to be trained in.
Yes, that would probably be a good thing to do, you'd hope. Anyway, thank you very much, Charlotte Littlewood, there from the Henry Jackson Society, and Rebecca Reid, one of our favourite broadcasters here at GBNews. Thank you very much. I wonder how many of you at home are familiar with TikTok. Let me know. Do you think we should all just scrap it from our phones for national security reasons? I don't particularly like the idea of my data going to the Chinese Communist Party for whatever they want to do with it, but also I am guilty of enjoying a little bit of the app myself. Now, lots of you have been sending in your thoughts on the topics we've been discussing up till now. On the topic of strikes, Ellen says, in my opinion, nurses will not be accepting this deal. It is not a done deal. Of course, they haven't accepted a pay offer, but it is going to be going to its members, I believe, so we'll see what happens. Linda says, we are paying taxes for a failing NHS and yet are expected to wait months for appointments. We need consumer choice, in other words, a private option. We cannot afford to care for unemployed people who do not care for their health. Privatisation will force people to take responsibility for themselves. That's what Kelvin McKenzie was saying earlier. He was suggesting that a different model for the NHS is what is needed, well, to boost the pay of workers too. On the government's plan to control illegal migration, Mitch has to say, do these snowflakes have a clue? If you increase the number of safe and legal routes, I think you'll still get exactly the same amount of people coming on the boats. Plus, you'll have more people migrating here legally. Unless they're saying that if we have the safe and legal routes, then we can immediately deport anyone who comes here by boats or illegal means. I do think you're probably right. It doesn't mean necessarily that just because you have more safe and legal routes available that no one will want to jump in a diggy. But there you go. Thank you all for sending in your views as always. Now, Scotland, there's quite a lot going on when it comes to the SNP. The chief executive, Peter Murrell, married to the outgoing leader, Nicola Sturgeon, has resigned with immediate effect. That's in a row over party membership. The SNP has confirmed that only 72,000 of its members were eligible to vote, a drop of more than 50,000. It comes after weeks of refusing to provide figures. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon denied the SNP was in crisis after the party was forced to admit that more than 40% of its members had quit, with many blaming Sturgeon's self-ID gender reforms policy as the determining factor. Well, she got out when she should have. Joining me now is political editor at the Scottish Daily Mail, Michael Blackley. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Scotland. So, a 40% drop in membership is not looking good for the SNP.
Yes, that was ultimately what led to the downfall of Peter Murrell, was the confirmation finally that the SNP's membership has gone down from a high of about 125,000 a few years ago to 70-odd thousand now. The media has been trying to establish this number for quite some time, and the SNP has been withholding the number. Indeed, they even withheld the number from the candidate standing for leadership. Pretty extraordinary stuff with that. But yesterday, the SNP's head of communications resigned because he had claimed that reports that the membership had fallen by about 30,000 were, in his words, drivel. He resigned yesterday because he said that he had passed on that information in good faith. It was information that came from party headquarters. So that made Peter Murrell's position pretty untenable. He was set to face a vote of no confidence today, but before that happened, he's now resigned. And this is a pretty major moment in the SNP's history, because they've been a massive election machine for the last 15 years. They've had huge electoral success. Obviously, a lot of the credit for that has gone to Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, but behind the scenes, the SNP campaign machine was really led by Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband. So his exit is another big moment for the SNP, and it adds to the impression that this is a party that's really collapsing at the moment.
It does seem like Nicola Sturgeon, love her or hate her, was the glue that was binding the party together. Do you think there'll be more resignations? Do you think people want to sort of get out while they can?
Yeah, so it's so many people are leaving at the moment. I mean, we've already had Nicola Sturgeon and also the Deputy First Minister John Swinney going. Now there's Peter Murrell as well. So the SNP hierarchy seems to be on the way out. There's a new leader coming in, will be appointed a week on Monday, and they might well look for a fresh approach. It's just going to be fascinating to see where the SNP go from here, because there's some in the SNP that think that this is repeating the sort of mistakes that happened in the final days of New Labour, where you had a party machine that was so disciplined, so on message, and then as soon as it started breaking apart, the party started collapsing around it. And there's possibly the feeling that maybe the SNP are going that way, that Nicola Sturgeon's departure has really triggered astonishing infighting, that while there's maybe been years of division in the SNP, they've tried to keep a lid on it. They've tried to not have the infighting in public, and now this is a party in the midst of a very, very public civil war.
Yes, and it's going to be quite the job for the next leader of the party to try to regain some, regain members firstly, but also then the trust of the nation. Just very quickly before you go, Humza Yousaf, is he going to be the next leader by the looks of things?
Well, Humza Yousaf is certainly still the favourite. He is the choice of the SNP hierarchy, and there was a suspicion from the other two candidates that he was being pushed forward by allies of Nicola Sturgeon, and indeed they have claimed from people in party HQ. Now that that's crumbling all around, I mean, who knows? Maybe that's going to impact his campaign. There's still those 70,000 odd members, and even people in the SNP cabinet aren't really entirely sure where they stand. Kate Forbes seems to be getting a bit of interest from some of those members. She is the candidate that's saying that a fresh approach is needed. She's criticised the SNP's performance in recent times. So it's going to be fascinating, and whoever wins, there's going to be a real struggle for the next leader to try and actually bring this party together after what has been a quite astonishingly bitter leadership contest.
It really is fascinating to watch, and we'll continue to bring the very latest on GB News, of course. But thank you, political editor at the Scottish Daily Mail, Michael Blackley there. Now, today marks 20 years since Parliament voted in favour of sending British troops to war in Iraq. Tony Blair's government passed the motion to use all means necessary to ensure the disarmament of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, despite a quarter of Labour MPs voting against the war. It passed instead with support from the Conservative opposition. The invasion began days after and raged well into the next decade, with the consequences still very raw for the international community and the veterans who served. Our reporter Will Hollis has more for us.
Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict, commenced at a time of our choosing.
2003 will be known for little else in modern memory other than the start of the Iraq War. A coalition led by the United States, bolstered through British support, today marks 20 years since Parliament voted in favour of the invasion. With Tony Blair as Prime Minister, the decision was made against a backdrop of mass public protest. One big question guiding the turmoil: was the invasion legal? Major General Chip Chapman is a former senior British military commander to US Central Command.
The war had been underpinned by UNSCR 1441, which was diplomacy had run its day, and that Saddam Hussein had to get rid of his weapons of mass destruction. Of course, that was the impetus to war, and the problem became that there were no weapons of mass destruction. So I don't think people really believed that. A lot of people didn't believe it because that led to the 1 million-person march in London. So there was a lot of fracture, and certainly from the top of defence, the Chief of the Defence Staff, the future Lord Boyce, did want to get clarification from the Attorney General that any intervention by the British Armed Forces was indeed legal. And he got that assurance.
The weapons were never found, and despite quickly toppling Saddam Hussein, the war evolved. British troops spent many years fighting an insurgency. It's one of the reasons why some Iraq veterans suffer with post-traumatic stress. Around 9% of Iraq veterans have PTSD. Anniversaries can act as a trigger, even many years later, according to the mental health charity Combat Stress. Dr. Felix Davies is Director of Operations.
We are still finding that we are having veterans of Iraq come forward to us for help at this time. And they're experiencing a range of mental health problems. Often people think about post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, but we also find veterans come forward with mental health needs around anxiety, depression.
The war ended in 2011, yet the consequences of the decision to go into Iraq burned through the last decade and continue to this day. Will Hollis, GB News.
Brilliant report there. Now we're going to be ending the show with a debate relating to the budget. One of the controversial and also celebrated things in the budget was the Chancellor's announcement that working parents in England will be given free childcare for children under the age of 5 from 9 months old, actually, by September 2025. I want to ask whether mums should be encouraged to work, or should they actually stay at home to raise their children? It sounds a bit of an old-fashioned question to ask, but I think it's still very relevant indeed. Joining me now is political commentator Bushra Sheikh and child development expert Dr. Amanda Gummer. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, I'm not sure on which side of the debate either of you are, so we'll find out together. Bushra, shall we start with you? What is your view? Do you think it's slightly odd that the government is encouraging all women, essentially, to get back into work as quickly as possible, to leave their children with a childminder as young as 9 months old? Is that a step in the wrong direction?
Honestly, I think it's absolutely ludicrous. Like, motherhood is the most wonderful thing, and at 9 months old, to leave your child behind and go back to work, essentially for me, is the wrong thing to do. I think the government should be supporting and endorsing mothers to stay home in those very elementary years for children. It's so important for their growth and the bonding years. And the fact that mothers breastfeed at least until 2 years old, that kind of tells us why it's crucial for mums to be with their children.
Dr. Amanda, now you're an expert in child development. Is it true that children develop better when they are being looked after at home by their mother?
Children thrive when they're in an emotionally stable, loving household and with parents who feel fulfilled and relaxed and confident about their life choices. And I don't think it's the part of government to dictate whether parents should stay at home or go to work. What I do think we need to do is recognise that there are a lot of parents who would like to work to be able to afford to provide things for their family. But the cost of childcare recently has been prohibitive. So giving parents more choice, I think, has got to be a good thing.
Yeah, Bushra, I mean, for many parents, many women, they may wish to stay at home for at least the second year of their child's life, but they simply can't for economic reasons.
Absolutely. And this is something that we have to really consider. Instead of paying a childminder or sending your child to nursery, well, by the way, if you have a nursery with 30 young 9 months old, they're not going to get the same love. that they would at home. This is something that I think the government should be supporting. They should be saying, let's give mothers something whilst they're staying at home, not to go back to work so early. So instead of paying childminders, let's pay mothers to stay home. Why is that something that they can't actually consider?
Well, there you go. A little bit of flexibility might not go amiss, giving parents more of a choice on how to spend what is essentially an expansion of the welfare state. Does it make a difference where the money goes? Amanda, in terms of what parents do to improve, how does a parent give their child everything that they need whilst also having to go out to work? I do worry that we're treating women almost as if they're better off as being a benefit to the economy rather than to their family. It's not a great way. I mean, this whole budget was represented as a back-to-work budget, and childcare was a big part of this. But do we forget that women are more than just a benefit to the economy?
Yeah, but I think a lot of women, and I think when we're talking about the parents staying at home, we should recognise that some fathers would prefer to stay at home too. So I think the gender debate is slightly throwing this off. But in terms of child development, kids get a lot of benefit, certainly from the age of sort of 18 months, 2 years old, from interacting with other children. And the social isolation that a lot of parents feel when they are at home on their own with young children can be detrimental to their mental health. So I'm not saying one way is better. I think we just need to recognise that it's a complex issue and that parents should be given support to make the decisions that are right for their family. And lowering childcare costs is definitely a step in that direction, because it does mean that parents who want to work for their own well-being, and in order to be that positive role model for their children, are able to do that without it being prohibitively expensive.
Yes, I think that would be, well, let's hope that comes to be with this policy, although it won't be implemented till 2025 in full, so we shall see if it ever gets implemented. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Amanda Gummer, child development expert, and also Bushra Sheikh, political commentator. Thank you very much indeed. Now, you've been watching Real Britain. That's all we've got time for this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for your company and for all your emails. This show is on every Saturday at 2 p.m, but for now, I will leave you with the weather.
Hello there, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry. Today has been a day of chasing rainbows for many of us in between the heavy showers that we've seen around, thanks to low pressure that is in charge across the whole of the UK. We do have frontal systems that's been pushing through Northern Ireland into areas of Scotland that's just bringing some longer spells of rain here, and it will also be breezier across the very far north of Scotland as we move throughout this evening and overnight. Elsewhere, the heavy showers that we have seen will tend to ease out and die out as we move overnight. That will allow some clear intervals to develop, just allowing temperatures to drop down a bit more. Towns and cities is still generally holding up around 5-6 Celsius, but auroral frost is possible across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and that could just provide some icy patches first thing on Sunday morning, particularly where we've still got a few showers lingering, but those continuing to ease out, and really Sunday is looking like a fine day for many of us, certainly throughout the morning, a good number of sunny intervals. A bit of cloud just lingering across the far east coast of England, and for Northern Ireland it's going to turn cloudier into the afternoon as this rain begins to arrive and turn damper here. But where you hold on to those sunshine throughout the afternoon, it will feel relatively pleasant and spring-like, highs of 11-12 Celsius. Southeastern areas of England will hold on to the dry weather during Sunday evening, but elsewhere the rain is then going to start spreading its way in, and as we then move into the start of the new working week, that heralds the change to some more unsettled weather. So during Monday, outbreaks of rain, a rather cloudy day for many of us, and fairly drab across the board. Some of the driest and perhaps brightest weather actually for northeastern areas of Scotland, where the rain just doesn't arrive until later on. The weather fronts are going to continue as we then move throughout the new working week, but you'll also notice that the isobars are beginning to squeeze together once again. So things will turn breezier as we head towards Wednesday. So whilst temperatures will be holding up in double digits for many of us, that will just take an edge off things. Enjoy the rest of your day.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect